particular order. Perfect. The first half of them that we discussed tonight, I kind of refer to as maybe the easier edits, the ones that may have a little bit less discussion on them. Because we could go ahead and prep something for that tonight and make this a little more effective with our time. The second half of those, we need to have some discussion on, and I need some direction from the committee before I can help to draft anything. Because they probably have a little bit more of opinion baked within them. So we'll go through both of those. So that second sheet says solar discussion topics. Those were the 12 that were kind of sent in from the committee. The two that have also then been mentioned, one is BESS, which is battery energy storage systems, commonly referred to as BESS or BESS. And then the other one was to also address maybe inspection fees as well, to kind of look at that would be within the fee schedule itself. So not within the ordinance, but it would be within the fee schedule. So if you guys are okay, I can add those as 13 and 14, if you guys are good with that.
Everyone fine with that?
Yes,
Yeah.
perfect. So I've added those to the official list there. So tonight, the goal was to try to make it through number 1 through 8. Again, these were ones maybe that had a little bit less variation on and what direction from. A lot of those were mirroring state statute, as folks kind of just had submitted those to us. So if you guys are good, we can kind of start to all run through these. So for each of those, what I've tried to do for you guys is break them up so you can see the topics, right, with the big underline. I always like to give a little bit of a rationale when we talk about amendments, because it's kind of like what's the thought process behind it. So those are just kind of my own rationale of what was submitted. And then on these, there is track changes. So you can see it's what is in black and white, that is your current ordinance. And then the strike through and underline is the potential amendments that we can work through. And this is similar to kind of when we did your ordinances. We'll go through each, piece of it. People can make suggestions. We'll kind of try to get consensus around this table and then move to the next one. So good game plan. Awesome. Okay. So the first one is more broad. I didn't go through and strike through and underline every one of those. So there's a couple different terms for this. It used to really be called primary, meaning it was the primary use on that parcel. A lot of communities have started to go to commercial. Now state statute is calling it commercial, solar energy systems, so either commercial SES or CSE system. So one of the suggestions was it's just a term name change. So nothing changing intent or anything. People tend to refer to it as commercial solar, not primary. So is that kind of okay with everybody? We're up? Any concern? Okay. So what you see tonight still says primary, because I didn't want to make that change without, that will get reflected throughout. And then the next round of edits, you'll see, I'll go ahead and strike out primary and make commercial on all of those. So, all right, moving right along then. All right, discussion topic number 2 was about power and communication lines. Indiana Code 8142 is the basis for a lot of these next changes. So this is more of a voluntary guidance. So it was set up through the state as not thou shalls, but if you want to be part of IEDC's solar ready community, these are the guidelines. So viewed really more as those recommendations or voluntary requirements within the state statute. So when we start to talk about power and communication lines, the intent on this previously was that those things that are low voltage that maybe are on the rack and connecting each panel, that's not the intent to bury those. The intent was to bury anything that was medium to high voltage. And so when we started to look at this, the revisions here are defining it within a fenced area and outside of the fenced area. So if you think of, there's an array of solar panels, there's some accessory, equipment that's going to be in there, and they're going to have a fence around that, right? So anything inside the fence versus outside the fence. And I've found that I think that's a pretty good way to kind of start to distinguish some of these. State statute, the voluntary, I see 8142 also starts to distinguish some of those. So what we're really looking at is within the fenced area, if it's 34.5 or greater, so it's that medium to high voltage, the depth comes from the state guidance now, so at least has to be buried at least 36 inches below grade. So it's saying anything that's medium high needs to go underground, low voltage, we don't really care about that. And then you can see that other power and communication lines that are less than 34.5, such as modular model collection cables, junction boxes may be located and maintained above ground. Then outside of the fence area is that all power and communication lines outside of the fence area have to be buried in at least 48 inches. So again, the 48 comes from that state statute that's referenced above. There are two exemptions that are currently in your ordinance. So exemptions to being buried. The first is that BZA can grant, an exception to that where there's bedrock, water courses, other kind of natural features that are going to limit the ability to bury it. And then the power and communication lines between the project and the point of interconnection, we were just talking right before this specify, it's between the substation. So all of their power lines are going to come into a substation. That substation is then going to connect to wherever their interconnect is. So and this is what the intention was, it's between those 2 points that it can be above ground. And that's what your current is, so that's up for debate if you want to change any of that, but between basically where everything comes together in their substation and that interconnect, that's where it can be above ground.
Correct.
And that was based off of, again, some of the model ordinances from the state.
So explain, understand, for example, when we have different solar fields located in the project that are scattered around various
Connected
county
by an
roads and so
easement.
forth. All of the wiring that would connect them to the substation or either
Underground.
run over to another panel field are all required to be underground by our ordinance, and our current ordinance requires that as well.
Correct.
Yes.
Yep, so those would all have to be underground. The above part is really just specifying a depth, and it's specifying that low voltage, we're not concerned about the low voltage stuff. The current ordinance, yes, so between that substation and that interconnect, it's allowed to be above ground. And that's pretty standard. I know they do want those as close as possible because of, you're just gonna lose, the efficiency of some of that, the further away it is. But again, I know some have been a mile apart. It just depends on where they can get that located. But I do know they want that as close as possible, but there's some constraints sometimes,
Well,
so.
the only thing I could see that we may need to add language on a couple of different things that come into play there. One is that when we're outside the fence area, in certain areas, there may be a need for a certain amount of marking. That, especially if you're out crossing public right of ways or crossing over or running parallel public right of ways. Something along the lines they'll do to where there's requirement, they come down 12 inches and they put in the foil tape. So when you're digging for a water line or whatever, you hit it. If it's a case of where they have done, boring to put the line in, it's not practical to be able to
Right,
put the tapes in. They require markers to be established and maintained on a basis there. So I have concerns over that we need to have some language marking. And then probably as well, there should be some type, maybe we can just cover it by granting an exemption, but in areas where it is not practical, get to 48 because of bedrock, there should be another step up of being able to provide some type of armoring or protection for that cable of some form, and armoring is a term they use for it at times, versus the situation of having to cut rock and get down 48 inches on all of it.
Yeah,
There'll be
so,
areas there that getting 48 inches could be difficult.
correct, and that's where the exemption under number 1 would allow BZA to adjust that. Now, I'll go always with the double-edged sword, right? BZA could grant that exemption right there, but say, okay, yes, it must be armored. But the flip side of that is your BZA has to know to say it needs to be armored. So I don't like to leave too much of that. It's a technical, these are citizen members, you know what I mean?
And we have an engineer here this evening. It's from the solar side of it. So, if there's ways that you see that we could address that, or language that you'd be aware, we'd be very glad if you want to provide us something that would work for
Okay,
you all versus as well as cover us as to what we're trying to accomplish there.
okay. I'm gonna write a note that it's not just burying, but it's also if they can't just get to that depth, that maybe there's a design parameter that gets included there.
Right.
Help me, I've got a question that when you're using the term substation. What exactly is that? I mean, is that like the inverters? Is that the?
And since we do have our solar person in the room, I'll
Yeah.
default to them. It looks like a substation now.
Right, so what we call the project substation is where all the power from the inverters is routed into one central focal point. And that voltage is stepped up from that medium voltage to the high voltage to match the voltage of the power lines. So generally that is located, a combination of factors will point to its location, could be central to a project, but from that project substation, then power goes up at the voltage that it will be connected to. So if it's 138 or 345, which are kind of typical voltages in the utility industry.
And that's when it goes above ground.
Yeah.
That's when it goes above ground. That's right. It's, it can't be buried below ground. It's just too costly. And then that will typically route into the utilities substation. So it goes from project substation to utility substation, and that's overhead.
Explain it as the fire hose. Gotta make sure the size is matched where they connect up, basically.
Not it runs backwards.
Was that?
Not it runs backwards.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Engineers.
I had a question too, on what we're talking about.
Yeah,
Does this will this affect any of the, non-participating landowners, or is it only pertaining to?
so it'd be anything that they have on their site or on an easement. So like they have a 100 acres on this farm and 100 acres. And the middle farm didn't, participate. They might have an easement that they purchased from that. We're talking about that easement too. So it wouldn't be if you just didn't participate at all, and you were across the street, it's not on your property. So this is,
Yeah, I was talking about the example you just said. That's what I was talking about.
yeah, so between it, they would be underground, between these 200-acre farms, that easement that they're gonna basically make a connection between, this requires it to go underground.
Would that, if it goes underground, is this depth going to be okay for if they're row cropping that, or if?
So typically, and again, we have her up here, so, but typically it's in an easement and you're gonna specify what they can and can't do in that easement. Because it's a agreement between that property owner and that utility provider.
Typically,
You don't
if they're,
want
if they're
things that
putting
are gonna
that in
damage.
at 48 inches of depth,
That's,
there are many examples to where we already have electrical lines, water lines, many things, a lot of even fairly high voltage electrical lines. When public service, you see the little green boxes that'll sit in the yards that are transformers and so forth.
Mhm.
The line that they run into those is the higher voltage. And those are underground. It's very common. People farm over top of those, do many things as such. Now, if you get into one of them by mistake, you sure know it. That's why I am wanting to have the marking requirements that would be part of it in certain areas. And also, something we didn't touch on as such, and I don't know how far to go with it, on the transmission lines, once we go overhead. There is a lot of controversy on studies as such as far as distance those need to be from existing homes, be from, and the effective land values on those. You get into Europe, they're much stricter on those. And, the studies, I guess they come out, there's some of them that say they cause cancer. There's other studies that say it doesn't cause any problems. So they're an area that we may want to, look at.
I would say if we wanna talk about setbacks, we include that in that setback
Yes, it
conversation,
needs to be. in
but
the
I'm gonna make a
setback.
note,
Okay. Wasn't quite sure if it would go there on the power and communication line section. An argument either way.
yeah, I could go either way. But let's maybe at least discuss it with the setbacks, cause
Okay,
I don't think we'll get through with setback on, I feel like
all
the
right.
setback discussion is usually the biggest, so. That's probably a good place to have that whole conversation, if that's okay.
Okay.
Okay. Any other thoughts then on this? We're gonna add and specify under number 2 below, it's a project substation, and then that point of interconnection. We'll also specify on number 1, with some help from our, solar rep here, if there's any design requirements that he can suggest, but, if they can't bury that at the required depth, but it's still buried, we might have to have some other design parameters or requirements within that. And then we'll add some language in about requiring markers or something similar within that public right of way, or do you want it everywhere? Just within the public right of
I think
way?
it needs to be where it would be crossing public right of way and maybe within so many feet of it. I don't think that it necessarily
on,
needs
like,
to be
farmers.
everywhere.
Yeah, it's his responsibility to kind of.
And
know that.
I think we already require a detailed set of as-built plans as yet, so there would be
believe so,
as-bills that
Are gonna show
actually
that, but-
would be able to visit and measure from certain points as here's where the lines are, but people don't
Okay.
always call. We have the whatever number it is you're supposed
Yeah,
to
the
call,
411
811.
or 811.
Whatever it is, and but people don't always get that job done, so. And even when you do, sometimes locations can be marked wrong and so forth. At least the electric is much easier to mark than some other types of lines.
Okay, so does that sound,
Will there ever be an occasion where an overhead line will cross public property?
only if it was between their the project substation and then the basically the utility company substation. That could be across the public right of way then, because it's gonna be that high, voltage.
There's some areas where they'll look at that if they're crossing another underground line, that they require them to put in, armoring there as such, that when it says arming, it sounds more complicated than what it is. One method they do it, they will take, sackcrete in paper bags and lay a row of sackcrete paper bags, which absorb moisture, turn to concrete, but yet they don't stick together. So when you have to dig down and get to repair and so forth, they come out easily. And there may be places that that's needed, not mainly, it's been other counties have a lot of drainage tiles. They've been concerned where there were drainage tile concerns.
Yeah, we don't
for
have that
those long
necessarily down
lines.
here.
We don't
No.
have, we're not dealing.
Up
with
north
much
of
of
a
that.
lot of that issue.
They're really flat.
Glad I don't do it on a daily basis. Okay, so any other thoughts on this one? Do we want to add anything? I know that's, again, that probably between their substation and utility substation is the bigger.
Yeah.
Thing.
A non-participating. What can he put into the system to keep, if he says, I don't want overhead lines crossing my property?
Well, they can't cross it then if they don't have an easement with them.
Okay, all right,
So,
okay.
yep, so that, they could go on the neighbor's property. And,
Yeah.
Because at this point, I don't believe they have any intimate domain rights to
Okay.
be able to come in and do
All right.
that, so. They're right away, and we haven't had the discussion, but I think these interconnecting lines. Those would be all on easement, we're not looking at allowing them to be ran on public right of ways, are we?
Correct, yeah, I would, because anything on your public right of way in that aspect, we can go ahead and specify that though, that.
I would think that they would need to be, well, on easement or obtain an easement from the local government for a right of way if it had to be.
Well, it must be within an easement, or
Yes.
approval, if in right of way approval
Yeah.
from whoever owns that road. I'll say, and I'm adding parcel too, because they could lease the land, like, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's a permanent requirement. So.
Okay.
Right away.
Got it. Okay, any other things here? Awesome, okay, so if you flip your page, number 3. Talks about glare, so the comment that was submitted on this one was just to reference the state statute on this one. We already did have glare in there for the aviation protection. FAA is gonna come do what they want to do, so they're gonna come in and they're gonna override anything anyway, so we do have theirs in there, which that is from the state guidance on that. The other one that was added though is just that they should be designed and constructed to minimize glare on adjacent properties and roadways and not interfere with vehicular traffic, including air traffic. So that language and verbiage comes from 8/1/4214, kind of pulled out. The other language within that, we already kind of had reflected somewhere in there, so. It's still broad, but I didn't even mean that pun, but good job, thank you. So it's still broad, it doesn't necessarily, you know what I mean, specify, but it's following that kind of state statute as well.
Something tells me that these are not located near an airport.
No, pilots don't like can't see.
Except in Indianapolis
Yeah.
that's surrounded.
Really.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and they have to look at so the state statute is 500 feet, so I think there's some on the other side of the interstate, right, in Indy? I don't know how far.
There's some on the same side.
Oh, is there now? Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like I drive by there, but don't pay attention as
Yeah.
much, 'cause I'm usually getting lost. So yeah, they do not like them within airports, just like FAA doesn't like
Yeah.
trees that attract birds and a bunch of other things like that. Okay. So then the topic 4 on your list here, is signal interference. So this is something that we did not currently have in the UDO. The FCC is really gonna be the one, if there is signal interference, they're gonna take care of that or really be the regulatory entity on that. So what we've done is just to pull in that, language from, 814215, about signal interference. So again, it's just saying that it must be installed in a manner, as to minimize and mitigate impacts to television signals, microwave signals, GPS and military defense radar. If you're messing with military defense, I guarantee you're gonna get a knock on the door. So,
I know the state
from us.
also says, radio reception in weather and Doppler radar.
okay, we can add those in. Let me. Good job. And 15. Okay, yep, I'll add those.
And then should we put something in there about, if there's issues about getting that taken care of? The project owner or whatever, how we word that, to have them take care of those problems.
So we can,
There's
the other.
complaints filed on it.
The other thing is if they are interfering with it, then it's a violation of the UDO and you have a set process, you already have a process for enforcement of that.
Okay, so it would be considered as typical complaint.
Yep, and then you would say, are you violating or not? Here, it's a little bit heightened because like if you're really having signal interference, there's federal entities that track that. Still remember I had Spectrum come knock on my door because they had a signal interference in our couple house area. And they had to walk around with their little, their equipment to find the signal. And they said it was FCC has contacted them. So I think we can, it's a violation of the ordinance and then you guys are gonna take care of that through your standard process of violations. You'll issue a violation notice and go through that process.
Gosh,
Go ahead.
it's Josh's job.
Yeah, I know.
I get another thing?
You're already doing it, Josh.
Well, let me stop here for just a moment, because we're moving along pretty smooth on these first 8, and I'm gonna change just a little bit and give the public an opportunity. Is there anything on these first 4 that we went through that's really giving, I don't want to take up much time or we'll go through it, but is there anything that's giving any alarm bells or anything you feel that on the first 4 that we've missed that needs to be considered in them? And the same thing over on the solar side, is there anything you're hearing that is going to be too difficult to meet requirements? Anything go ahead, stand up and tell us your name and.
Sherry Chapin.
Mhm,
I just had a question on non-participating landowner
mhm.
easements. If the developer is determined to be a public utility, can they acquire that through eminent domain without that landowner's?
I would think that if they
Permission?
took enough steps through that they were a public utility, they could probably find eminent domain rights, but I'm not the attorney on that, and that would be a question there as such.
I've not seen the public utilities doing these. It's been that third party vendors that kind of middleman that then sells them back. We also within the ordinance do utilities within the right of way, right? That's a whole nother world. It's like cell towers within, the right of way and that sort of thing. On private property, we still regulate that as a use, as a land use. Now, I believe most of the utilities are permitted, public utility facilities are permitted within there, but not solar. So,
But it could be through a third party, and these developers a lot of times do sell their projects. They don't stay and develop them. So it is a possibility. So if we've got disjointed, a landowner that's not participating in.
Let's back up this bit. Let's try to stay on the
Yeah.
floor that we're at. We're getting, your questions are important. And there's something that do need to be brought up and we need to have some discussions on that. But I don't think it ties in with where we are right at the moment. And if we get too sidetracked, we won't get done tonight.
We were on easement, so I.
Right, I understand.
Okay.
Yeah, we're,
One cut,
yes,
just to address like some of the FCC regulations
Yeah.
and violations. So
Got it.
I did some research after digging through these things and seeing how popular this topic has become to educate myself some. There are multiple counties around us that have solar panels in different places and different arrays. And none of them have experienced any radio interference with their emergency services radios, 800 megahertz microwave signals and or the 155 VHF band.
Yeah.
So,
My understanding, it is very rare.
yes.
It's
Yeah.
like spectrum having interference. It's gonna be rare, but it's
Nobody that I've
gonna
talked to is experiencing any problems whatsoever.
So-
since those panels have been in use.
and quick, we had someone else, Mr. Yarling, I think you wanted to comment.
Kyle Yarley, 4193 West Reed Road, absolutely. On the airport, on the glare topic there,
be.
does that apply to only commercial airports or to private?
It would apply to private airports as well, especially the
We have
ones.
Lee Bottom.
Yep,
Yes,
it would
lead
probably got
bottom,
them.
yes, and just construction in general, there's already requirements for ordinance that if you're within a certain area, things have to be filed with the airport side out in the state and so forth.
And we worked with them when we did the ordinance in
Yes.
general to make sure that we have an airport overlay over them. Yep,
Obviously, they don't have much air traffic.
correct, but they still have the
would still
approach
have-
zones
They
and-
still have,
Still have-
yes,
As well as there are a couple. airstrips
Yeah.
out there in Tennessee.
yeah, I'm not quite certain how much the private airstrips, we haven't visited that, as the ones that are actually registered with the FAA
Yeah.
as airports. and
Correct.
things. We do not address the private airports and such in
That
our
are-
ordinance,
that are not regulated.
are not
under
regulated, right,
NDA. Like
on that
Lee
side.
Bottom is, so they're.
And the
included.
main reason for that was to protect the airports to where you build a house at the end of the runway, you don't get to complain that you have too much airplane noise over your house now. And so that's where those came from.
Our current GIS program does have, airport overlays. One, the Madison Airport and Lee Bottom's both are marked out on the GIS. So if you're building in that area is what they're talking about, where you have to, send
So we can maybe even specifically define that. with the same term.
But the ones that are out there are, you know, if this solar thing would go through, I mean, they're gonna have solar panels all around.
They'd be able to raise the issues over the glare as well, but, anything else? All right, we'll move on to number 5.
Okay, so sound levels. Again, this is something that was not specifically addressed within the UDO for this use. You guys have some, again, other ordinances and nuisance ordinances of noise and all of that stuff. So we went ahead and just mirrored 814216 on this one. So again, it's looking at all sound attributable to the SES shall not exceed an hourly average sound level of 50 A-rated decibels, measured at the outer wall of the dwelling located on the adjacent non-participating property. This is coming from state statute. It could be waived upon mutual agreement. So if the neighbor doesn't care, then we can waive things. So that 50 A-rated decibels comes from state statute. And the measurement does as well. Any questions about?
No, I don't know enough about to be able to give an example of what 50.
So like when I have on today, my Apple Watch will measure, decibels. I'm not saying it's most accurate sometimes is anything, but my kids just doing their normal hoopla is up in the 80s. So I will get notifications even when they're just running around having fun. Yeah. Yeah, the 6 one, yeah, so it's pretty low. Yeah, it is not anything that's gonna be, completely loud then, so. Quieter than my kids. All right, so then if we move on to 6 on the next page, so this is fencing. So currently, our ordinance is really just relying on state statute for this, for the building code. So your building code for these systems are either that they're gonna be required to put a 6-foot fence in with 1 foot of barbed wire or a 7-foot fence. So that's kind of the state statute. Your current ordinance already, prohibits barbed wire, so that puts you back to 7-foot fence. On these, so what basically we're better defining this, I guess, within it. It's not really gonna probably change the outcome, if that makes sense, though. So we're basically defining that they have to, all of the components excluding an enclosed and secured building. So if you have a separate building that's, completely enclosed, you don't need to fence that in. They have to be completely enclosed by perimeter fencing that is at least 7 feet high. I went with that one because you guys already prohibit barbed wire, so. We left the barbed wire in there as prohibited. Wildlife friendly fences, is permitted, so those come in a couple different fashions. It's, sometimes they have openings like, yay big, that the small animals can kind of go through, the deer are just gonna jump them anyway. It's not giant gapping holes that I can climb through necessarily, but smaller holes. There's, some people like them, some people don't. Some people say the animals actually get stuck in those. Some people say that we do need it so the animals can pass through and have habitat. That's a personal or a local preference. But I did just leave that in there. I know someone had asked about that. The other one that did add in, this does not come necessarily from, all of the state statute, but it looks at maintaining, some sort of Knox box, an emergency key box, right? If something emergency happens in there, it'd be great for our EMS folks, I'll kind of look at you back, right? To be able to get to the problem or the issue. So, when we've looked at this in other groups and worked with other even, solar entities sitting on the kind of side here like this is, they say that's not an issue. It's pretty easy. A lot of businesses, large businesses will do this as well. So, our large sites. So we did add that in there. Or I did add that in there.
I see a need to consider possibly, on the 7-foot fencing, specifying at least some types of specifications as
Okay.
to how heavy this fence has to be. And I don't know enough about fencing to be able to tell you what those specifications should be. And something in the,
I mean, heavy as in it won't fall over or
well,
like,
for example,
structurally
most of, I
heavy
assume most
or-
of it's probably gonna be chain link fencing is probably about the
probably
only
so,
thing.
yeah.
And there's various gauges of chain link fencing that you can
Yes.
buy. There's a heavier gauge that's generally considered for commercial type projects.
Okay,
And generally as well, there's requirements of whether you require to run the top bar or not run a top bar, where they actually put a piece of pipe across the top that strengthens fence. Sometimes there'll also be a wire stretched at the bottom that keeps the fence bottom more in place. There's probably some standards for security fencing that may need to look at what's there. And then I'm especially concerned, since we're looking at projects that have quite some long life term on these, that something that is corrosive resistant, so we don't end up with what the proving ground fence looked like after 20 years of rusted
okay,
situation there. And I don't know what the standards are on that.
okay, we can look into some of those if you guys want us to. Okay,
I have a question too.
yes,
I know this is marked out, alternative fencing can be used at the site of incorporating agrivoltaics. Is this saying that we can't use the?
I just went ahead and eliminated, good, I'm glad you brought that up, Lynette. So that's when you're gonna incorporate some sort of like, and not many in India are gonna do this. Some people might put sheep there underneath or something of that nature, not goats, but sheep or something of that nature to kind of do some sort of farming activity still. This would be, involving more of the agrivoltaics, the water aspects of those too. I just eliminated, you can't do alternative fencing, so it's more of saying like, you're gonna have to follow these fencings or get a variance, because.
So we're not discouraging,
No, they can still do that, it's just they have to still do our 7-foot fence
okay,
instead, so let's not.
okay.
Mainly that came from the state model ordinance. Sometimes feel like it can be a little vague because it's kind of open-ended. So I would rather just define it so everybody knows what the expectation is and then go from there. I don't feel like a lot around here are doing this, and I don't know if you've seen ones around here doing that either. Look at our solar rep or in the Midwest are really doing that or not. What's that? No, the agrivoltaic, the incorporating sheep, some are, I know that. But involving other types of agricultural activities under there. So
I'm kind of with Warren on the specs, can we have something in there about maintenance or possibly painting or something like that, the upkeep of the fencing?
Yeah. Just say like in good, I can pull some language in good repair that's,
Mhm.
I had a question. Is the fencing and screening two different?
That would be two different things, yes.
yes, and let's see if we. And screening was not actually sent, it was just fencing that was sent, so if we wanna add that to like the list of things. I mean, that might kind of be more of a conversation with setbacks, because if you want, I can add that to, yeah, the setback discussion.
Cause there's been, well, David, you might elaborate, you actually went up north and looked at some installations.
Yeah, the screening really does help that, the visual from the road. There's
Right.
one near an airport in Illinois I went and saw, and the screening really did help on that. But I'm a little concerned about the wildlife friendly fence.
Okay,
It could create a habitat for nuisance animals, and there won't be any hunting, of course, in these solar areas. So we need to rethink that.
we can, that's totally up to you, like I said, that's a local. Preference on how you wanna deal with that, so I think either way is fine, as long as you guys make a decision.
I agree with David. I mean, birds
Okay.
are great but I'm sure there are some kind of birds that are destructive. I don't know about that, but insects and things, but deer are very destructive.
Yeah, and the deer are probably still gonna maybe.
Oh, yeah, they
Jump
jump,
over that guy.
over that proving ground fence.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say, like, they just run, they. hop
And then
it
you
over.
get into
get in
coyotes
our
and
fields,
some of those animals that are
Yeah,
whatever.
they're not gonna get over a 7.
No, but I'm talking about you're making wildlife friendly fence.
Okay,
You said something about holes and what have you. They can make dens and what have you, and then there's, of course, there's nothing. The
Hunting
neighbors are gonna be able to, if their den's over there and trying to protect, their land.
okay, do
So,
we wanna say it's prohibited or just? What do you guys got?
I think a fence is a fence, so you wanna, I think, keep in, keep out, I would eliminate all
Okay, so
the.
we could say like what barbed wire and the woven wire designs, and then wildlife friendly fencing, all are prohibited. Right? Okay,
But are we saying do you wanna wait and do that on the setbacks on the?
No, that could be on the fence side, that's part of the.
yeah,
fence.
cause we do say the wildlife friendly.
You know, the fence is gonna be an interesting on that side of it, because a lot of what we consider nuisance animals, unless we go clear to the extent to where we require that they put a concrete barrier underneath the fence, which I don't believe we're wanting to go that far.
down there.
They'll find a way.
They'll find a way to get in there, I mean, there's.
Let's make it a little
groundhog
harder for them.
raccoons.
Yeah.
Don't give 'em a front
They'll get under that fence about as quick as you can.
Let's make them earn it.
But, and I don't see. I guess there's a possibility that if it creates a haven for them, that they leave that area cause there won't be a lot of food sources in it. There would be a haven that they would leave that area for surrounding food sources that could have a negative impact on surrounding properties, but overall, I'm not seeing a lot of risk for
Yeah,
negative impacts on the properties around there.
Yeah.
If they wanna take all my raccoons and live in that fence, that'd be kicking me gas, but, without there being food sources, a lot of them, there won't be any water sources, so it may not be quite the haven you'd think it would be.
and just to also mention, like, your current screening is, you have some
We do.
more stringent current screening in there, and I think that's probably why nobody added it to the list, because it's already addressed, so I'm gonna guess, but we could still bring that topic up when we talk about setback. Anything else on fencing then?
The screening, that, I saw that as well. Should we go ahead and have that as a, part of the amendment?
Yeah, so right now you guys require any of these commercial, basically solar areas to be fully screened, including across the street over a right of way from an existing dwelling, a parcel is platted for residential. So right now we've got to fully screen that. They have to submit a landscape plan. It also has to comply with our buffer yard standards. It's not required along highways or roadways, except as otherwise stated. if it's the same zoning district. So if it's just an ag, then there's no house on that parcel, it's just truly a farm, it doesn't require the screening. But the BZA can require any additional screening if there's a clear, need. That's with any reasonable conditions.
And at this point, our screening could be, you could choose to do that two different directions. It could be done by landscaping, or
Or
it could be done
fencing.
by the fence itself. Don't know if it needs to be either or both, or.
However you
I
wanna
don't know
screen it
what-
right now, just
The
say
one
fully
the
screened.
one I went and saw was in the screening and it was nice and it was clean. I'm afraid if we do, in my opinion, that the bushes and landscaping, that over time, if they're not maintained, might not be as eye appealing. But the one I went and saw in Illinois,
It's fiberglass.
yeah,
That's what I saw.
it kind of wove through it and it was.
Was it a fiberglass fence?
No, it was a
When you're-
woven wire, or chain link, I'm sorry, chain link fence. And they had two different
Did they put
colors.
slats in it? Or what was the screening, the visual screening? Did they have a visual screening?
It was just woven in there.
Yeah, so it was just like the
solid.
slats. that
Yeah,
Flats, it's
just
flats.
slats that went in there and they had two different colors. One was like a tan and then the other was a green. And it was along all the highway or county roads going to it all around it. So anything had highway or road access, it was screened. And then they had it mowed nicely. And then some areas they had corn planted in between the road and that fencing. But I didn't see anything around the housing that, other than that fencing. It wasn't any bushes or anything around there.
Okay, when we come back next meeting, I'll add, maybe as we screen it along roads, but if you're going with your example,
That's
it would
just
be
what I
chain
saw.
link with slats.
And it did
beside.
look nice, but that's just
versus-
one example, but I'm not saying that's what we need to do, but it did look nice.
I also saw one with the nylon like sheeting that you put that.
Those blow off.
Yeah, those would be gone in
Yeah.
a good windstorm, wouldn't
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead, you
Yeah,
had some
I'm gonna
comments.
save my comment later, but while we're talking about fencing, I did want to bring up just one item for y'all to consider. I'm very supportive of the non-bob wire project fencing throughout the solar field arrays. The one maybe caveat or thing for y'all to think about is the project substation itself. Substations typically in Indiana do have a barbed wire component, and it's simply a safety concern to keep people out of there from hurting themselves. So
I think it's very
I think
well-
that's a-
that's very well taken, yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Some
that's-
of them even have much higher than 7-foot fence.
Yeah,
Justin, to add to that around the substation, I believe that's a federal standard anyways. And so we would need to be in compliance with that.
yeah, we'll add that, that's a good point.
Any thoughts on landscaping, screen versus, fence screen? Anyone have any?
Do you think
I can see it
people,
varying from homeowner to homeowner. There may be a given not participating owner that would prefer landscaping screen and
right, then a
next door
fence?
neighbor may.
Honestly, I thought it was both.
I just
That was
do.
my interpretation at least when I read it, I was thinking,
The fully
we're
screened.
doing a fence and we're doing a buffer screen over everything.
We're doing a screen
You're-
fence?
If your fence was chain link, if your current one,
Fence on
I would say
everything,
if your
yeah.
fence is chain link, your current one, you're landscaping it. If you put up a solid fence that can't
Yeah,
see through, then that would be fine.
yeah, I'm just, I guess I'm thinking the chain link fence, what I'm envisioning,
If it was
in
chain,
addition to,
then you'd be putting up.
you're putting in. more
Currently, that's what you would be
buffers.
doing. If you just had a plain chain link, you'd be buffering it with landscape vegetation.
Okay.
And would
Currently,
not have the slats in it as such.
right.
Cause I thought the same thing Lynette thought, cause under, the
Right.
landscape
Yep.
plan shall be submitted, so therefore I thought we were.
And that's what more
landscaping, not
tend to go to, is
around
the
the
chain link and then do landscaping.
Mhm.
So I've got some insight I'll put into that section next time.
Well, and I know he talks about, it's written that, in the same zone, where did I see that at?
Yeah, hold on. Oh, it's on in that section, it's here.
Okay.
That's
right. I saw
not
that.
required.
Yeah.
Within the same zone unless the adjoining parcel has an existing residential use. So if it's total, it's just a farm.
Yeah.
then you're not gonna have to buffer or screen that.
Yeah, and I was thinking maybe we could look into that and say we should, or, because I'm thinking, if I'm not mowing hay, I don't wanna see that over there. I don't wanna see the arrays. Does that make sense? That's what I'm thinking. That's, that sounds disrespectful, I'm sorry, that's not what I meant. I'm just saying, we have it written up as a residential use.
Right, and we're really just worried about residential in the current one, it's not worried about the other uses, so.
Right.
Yeah,
If you want, some of the amendments I can just put forward for you guys to start, marking up here at the next meeting, we could talk about all sides versus beyond.
thank you.
Okay. Anything else on fences then? Number 6?
I had one more question.
Yeah,
Access for EMTs, fire companies,
so let me scroll to that for you.
is that included in this? There?
We have that in our ordinance now elsewhere, and then we've added this addition of providing the key boxes and so forth, of emergency access. Or a pass key that EMS would have, something.
Yes, something that they could,
There may also be a requirement that you immediately notify the solar company that you're going to enter as such, or have entered. I'm
Yeah.
sure they're not going to want us to be in there any longer than necessary without them being aware of it.
yeah, we have something about an EMS plan, what was in this was the. thought we did. I'm quickly trying to scroll. Sure, bonds. I'll double check and make sure, but typically, so they at least need to just give an EMS, like, again.
You had
Are you still discussing the, vegetation, the landscaping?
Well, yes, as far as whether to do a buffer to screen area with landscaping or require actual, something in the fence that would make it solid, or a combination of both.
And we'll go through those at the next meeting, because we don't have amendments on that yet.
Everybody in here has viewed the solar arrays on Highway 36, which would be north of 70, going over toward Randolph County.
Yeah, I've been by that one.
You've seen them where they're on both sides of the road.
Yeah,
And there are no screens anywhere,
right.
but they have planted I guess I would call them evergreen.
Yeah.
Bushes, but they're not very tall. I mean, they're not even hardly as tall as the fence itself. And they're pretty far apart. They really do nothing
No.
at all. I was just over there this weekend and, just was amazed that, yeah, there was a lot of them planted, but just in certain sections, and it did nothing.
I think they were planting them in anticipation they're gonna grow, but unfortunately, you're looking at 10 years or better before they
But they
even
look
get.
like the type of landscaping shrubbery that is not intended to be very big. That's what they look to me like.
They were,
I'm not a
you're right.
expert,
Yeah, I'm not
but I recognize that some of them are dwarf type versus ones that will definitely get big. And these did not look like.
We can have,
We'll discuss that more.
yeah,
at the land
I'll
use
bring
side.
some thoughts on that too.
Right, because if you think about it, as a farmer, we really don't want a bunch of trees and shrubbery shadowing our cropland. And so if we want to farm that area and it's got a landscaping 10 foot wide or whatever, then that takes up our ability.
And there
to farm.
maybe is again, unless it's waived by that adjoining property owner, if you say, please don't put it up, then there can be a waiving kind of process.
Mhm.
Okay,
All right, we'll move on to the stormwater.
okay, stormwater, so this one, in my mind, is a little more straightforward too. This was just trying to make sure it's clarified, as we were going through the UDO process, the county was just starting their drainage ordinance, and trying to establish the drainage board, and I think that's been established, right?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay, getting there. All right, so we might need to tweak a little bit of this, so the comment was just to talk about who basically approves your NPDES permits, which is again, an item
But do we have one?
function.
I mean, I don't think the county has an NPDF permit.
Okay, so I thought the drainage ordinance had been adopted.
But you know, when,
Even with that, the city of Madison would, because they're an MS4.
Correct, so they have
Right.
requirements, they have an MS4 coordinator and all that
Right.
fun
We
stuff.
don't.
Do you think the county's gonna do, is that a good question to ask now, should I know?
Yeah, you can ask, but I don't think we're gonna do an NPDF permit.
Okay,
We will, I mean, there will be stormwater management requirements, yes.
Right,
But we're not gonna.
okay, and not go through a drainage board either,
Well, there will be a drainage board that,
Okay.
you know. when
and the
we
purview
start
of your county surveyor.
Regulated drains and things like that, but I don't think we're.
Okay, who do you want to, maybe we'll phrase it this way. When those do come in, who do you want reviewing, approving any sort of drainage or,
I think you can leave it as the drainage board. It's fairly close. It's gonna
Okay.
take a little bit of time, but.
The city's using a consultant out of Wilmington to do theirs right now. So,
Right.
and that's common too.
yeah, so I mean, there's a consultant we can probably tap into.
But I know like whenever we disturb over an acre of land, we have to
You've gotta
have a
go do-
permit through IDEM.
The old Rule 5.
And if this is considered industrial, they also have to go through
Yeah.
IDEM.
If they're gonna
So-
disturb more than an acre, yes, and
Right.
total site disturbance. And this project item will view this as, if it's,
And
doesn't matter if it's 50 parcels, they're gonna view it as one project.
Right, and I think I was reading that if it's considered an industrial project and, they can correct me if I'm
So
saying
you
this
will have to
wrong,
get
but-
item, the
they would
old
have to-
Rule 5.
Yes, but also that it's a project that produces electricity on a commercial basis, then it also falls under IDEM.
Yes, yeah, they're gonna have to do that review if, unless you're MS4, like you said, with the city's MS4, so they administer their own version of the Rule 5. They are gonna have to, and IDEM
IDEM
finds
is gonna be
those, they,
Yeah, they do.
yeah, don't they? I really wanna know how.
So do we need to put language in here? I mean, yes, it would be approved by the drainage board, but until that's created,
That's the commissioners until it's created. So,
okay, so.
Okay, I'll put something,
as we found out.
we found out it was yours. I'll put something, commissioners, if the board doesn't exist.
But we still have to do IDM as well.
Well, the project will, right?
Yeah, so
but-
the project as a whole still has to go through item.
Right.
Until you, and if you ever were, I don't think it'll probably ever be MS4, but you're too ruled to do that. Like Clark County, the whole county just went MS4, or is going MS4 at the moment. So part of it used to, there should go through IDEM and part should go through, you know what I mean, MS4, but, yeah. Okay, so we'll specify that. All right, then the last one. This is a new one too. So we are looking here at damage to public infrastructure, acts of God, violence, or other unforeseen events, and then maintenance of vegetation and screening. So I went ahead and put that here with the question of we could move it to your screening requirement. We just at that moment weren't bringing screening up, so, I figured if you guys just tell me where you'd like it to live, we can, if we settle on the language, it's easy to move it. So again, currently what would happen if, you know, a residential developer, like a home builder was coming in and building, you know, subdivision, they damage your county roads. Your, road department is going to be addressing that through some, notice letters and violations. So that's how we were currently just handling this, was that, again, it's just like anybody else who might damage your roads or any public, asset that you guys have. So we went ahead and pulled, again, some of this does come from some of the Indiana code that we've referenced earlier. It's kind of pieces and parts of that. So the damage to public infrastructure, what we've looked at here. Again, this is language that's being pulled from that state statute with a few small tweaks, but damages to waterways, drainage ditches, field tiles, which you guys, I don't think have any field tiles, right, in the county. We don't have those issues here. Other drainage related infrastructure, I added in, including the cost of any required permits and or review by the county's outside or contracted engineer. Because that is something that the county has. I wanted to make sure that's specified here. That is caused by the construction, installation, maintenance of that primary SES. Must be completely repaired by the project owner and remedied within remedied with the installation of new drainage infrastructure that's approved by the drainage board. All repairs have to be approved by that board and completed within the time frame specified by them. I'll add the county commissioners. For,
And or, huh?
if the board does not exist, it's the county commissioners, but, the idea is if you damage the drainage infrastructure, you gotta fix it, you gotta have the board approve it, you can't just fix it however you'd like it. The next one, number 2, is very similar, so it's talking about public infrastructure, so it's talking about including our public roads and rights of ways. If you damage that, again, it still has to be completely repaired. Here, though, it has to be approved by the highway department and done within the timeframe specified by the highway department. I use them just because they're the ones approving, they're the ones doing your inspections on your roads and in terms of new subdivisions and stuff, so. Again, that would that would basically happen anyway today, but we'll just specify it. Then the next one is basically any damage, fire, flood, tornado, natural disasters, acts of God, acts of violence, or other events which the project owner doesn't have control over, has to be repaired within 12 months. And if it doesn't produce power for 12 months, then it goes through that decommissioning process that's already specified in the ordinance right now. So again, that 12 months is up to you guys in terms of repair and that sort of thing. The last one I'll go throw in and then you can discuss them, I guess. Any of that screening, vegetation, ground cover, that has to be maintained at all times in good condition, free of weeds, dirt, trash, debris. And if any of that is dies or damaged, has to be replaced within 3 months. That's a little bit easier to repair sometimes than bigger items. Again, this one, we can move over to the screening section, especially since we're gonna get to that. So we'll move that one, but the language would be the same.
When I was looking over the state standards, and then I also, pulled up Posey County and, with their damage and maintenance and repair, and they just went to a little bit more detail.
Oh, the original or better condition?
Yeah.
And the only reason I didn't, put that in, so she was saying it could say has to be repaired to original or better condition. I went a little bit more, I guess, allowing the drainage board or highway department to have control over that. It has to be approved by them. So in my mind, that's good, versus just saying same or better. It needs to just be approved by this entity that basically is in charge of that. So I went a little bit more like, I guess, not as specific, but allows them to say, this is how I need it repaired.
Well, yeah, and then, because I know our language says project owners, that was says project owner. And I know theirs says, repairing all damages to county-owned or regulated or non-participating landowners, waterways, drainage ditches, field tiles, or any other infrastructures caused by construction or maintenance of the project.
Yeah, so if you wanna, where on the infrastructure, we're just focusing on public infrastructure. If solar array, if, you know, whether that project owner damages the neighbor's property, that's in my mind more of a civil issue. Amongst, it would just be like if we were neighbors and I don't know, I came and damaged your property in some fashion, that's a civil matter amongst us. But that's up to you guys.
They'll probably need to say civil matter.
Yeah, I don't know, though, that would be a good question for your attorney, language attorney and legality of being able to, enforce that, but. Okay,
And something else, I don't know that it fits in with this part on the primary SES maintenance and damage repair. But there also, maybe it comes more over when we get into discussions on some type of construction management plan. Because, and I'm not sure where to put that, because there has been, talk to some counties that have been through this or in the process.
yeah, I just heard you
And
mention.
there is
some of
a
those.
huge need during the construction phase of these to be able to have a solid construction management plan in place, that it's, if it's not handled correctly, it can be far more disruptive than what comes into mind. I mean, I don't think we quite realize the scope of things for 2,000 acres worth of solar panels, as to how many panels that is, how many posts in the ground, how many trucks that are coming in and out and so forth. And they get into problems of dust control. They had taken steps to where they're set up to where they automatically have a meeting once a week with certain county officials, that they review what's taken place in the last week and what's going to be coming on in the next week. The projects may go on for as long as a year to 2 years to be able to complete a large project. Issues of, an understanding, and this is just one example, there may be many ways to address it, that, you know, trucks are delivering to many different locations when they're delivering it. They'd set it up to where all the inbound trucks go to one central headquarters and so they're not having GPS that's routing them out to this county road or whatever, then they literally provide solar installer, provides an escort vehicle to take that semi as to where it's going. And then considerations that during certain crop times of harvest and so forth, that they realize that, roads need to be kept open, that the combine going down the roads got priority over the solar panels coming in at that time. So there was quite a bit more involved during the construction phase on the coordination and the amount of disruption that there could be in a given area. Places to where, county roads have had a lot of mud tracked out onto the roads. And as to how quickly that's addressed and dealt with, that it just can be a problem. Once they're completed, those issues go back.
I think maybe that is a 15th topic, like it's another
Okay.
topic in my mind, cause it's
That's
a little
fine.
more than just maintenance.
Mhm.
It's more of like an MOT almost, but for construction, like.
It's more like, yeah, best management plan, that type of thing.
And sounds
Okay.
like we've been very generic in L, which is the development plan required in the normal ordinance.
Yes, and that is gonna be number 10.
Yeah.
Let me go back to that. Yeah, cause right now we say that they have to get development plan approval,
We can send a detailed plan, but then we're very generic in what we call out, so being a little more specific.
yes, and some of that is covered in your application too. Some of those
Okay.
requirements are in your app. So we can kind of, maybe I'll pair that with it when we talk about development plans next time, on that too. Anything on this damage, maintenance, repair section though?
I think the one thing I saw, there's quite a bit of access roads that are gonna be built. And I don't know, Michael, do you have any idea on the mileage, how many miles of access roads you're gonna build?
Within the site or like access with, onto a public right of way?
Both.
Okay,
So, I can give you that number, I don't have it off. the top of
It's,
my
it's
head.
quite a bit of road building, and it does, looks like in some cases it does go across not only county roads, but state roads. Even somebody that's,
Are you talking about within the project fence?
no, actually,
access onto a road,
access.
like curb cuts basically, for lack of.
Yeah.
So the state, you're gonna have to get NDOT approval, like to get access to theirs unless it's an existing one. And I'm not gonna remember this off the top of my head. Do you guys do driveway permits from the road department? Okay,
Not yet.
cause I know we discussed that last time and the highway department was kinda like, oh, that's an interesting. You know, a lot of counties will, anytime you have to, anybody, it doesn't matter what you are, you got a permit to access the right of way to make sure you're not connecting in a manner that's dangerous, you know what I mean? You're not disrupting a ditch,
Mhm.
by not putting in the right size culvert or any of that type of stuff.
The city has driveway permits.
Yeah, I would imagine. And most communities do have some form of a permit, depends. I know Floyd doesn't in this area though, but
Yes,
Again, just a suggestion, we've seen other counties handle a lot of these things through a road use agreement with the county commission.
and maybe that's just how that's specified, because it would be worked out with your highway department, which is who we really probably need to get, you know what I mean? Okay. Okay, that'll be
there may
number,
be is there a road use agreement as part of this application? I can't remember for certain. I was thinking possibly there was.
It's common, it's part of our best practices.
Right, because I draw some confusion, because I've also looked at everything that came in on the battery side. There was some type of road use agreement on the battery side, so I wasn't sure if there'd been one submitted
that might be a
separately.
good way to just
Yeah.
address that, because each project's gonna be different.
Yeah. It has not been submitted, but it will be submitted at some point. That will include traffic patterns, roads.
Staging and all that.
Staging, all that.
Okay, anything else on this maintenance, damage, or repair though? Okay,
And there will be any type of, escrow, request.
we require, yes, so one of our next topics, perfect transition, good job. So if you, that's right. So if you kind of look back at our list of the topics, we've added 3 more: inspection fees, BESS, which is battery energy storage systems, and then either this road use agreement, road construction management plan idea. So we've made it through the first 8, feels good, right? I did pick the easier topics, so I'm not gonna lie about that, to go through tonight. I'd like to do next time is to go through basically 9 through what is now 15. So we did have 4, we added 3 more on that. I'll give you at least a little bit of like view of what we just received from the committee, the kind of reason why it got on the list. The discussion of right now, it is currently in a special exception use in ag. There's the discussion of the question of should this be in an industrial district instead? There's pros and cons, we can kind of discuss on that. From a best practices standpoint, you don't want thousands of acres rezoned to industrial in your county. That could then be other things if there's not a written commitment or condition placed on that rezoning. It also introduces multiple steps to have to go through. I think that's what Madison was just going through, that it had to be rezoned and then go through special exceptions. So there's multiple levels of things to go through. So there's pros and cons to that. So that's kind of more just a discussion next time to kind of prime your thought processes there.
It was a little different. They were just rezoning to ag. The property was currently.
Oh, okay.
It was R1 or it was.
Oh, okay, that's a little
residential
different.
agriculture, and they were not
Or-
a special or conditional
Okay,
uses
I don't
in
have all the
those.
information.
So they were
Just
just
tidbits
asking
here.
for a change to ag, basically. They,
Okay, so
they
that'd
had
be the
not taken
opposite.
a step to where it had to be.
Opposite of you
industrial.
guys, most
Yeah.
of your stuff is zoned ag already.
Yeah.
It's the same thought on, honestly, in Kentucky with distilleries. They'll rezone for a distillery for a rick house or something, and then it won't actually, they won't end up using that area for a rick house, and now it's zoned industrial. Bullitt County's had a lot of that lately too, or in history, so. That's that one. Number 10 is looking at site plan and development plan requirements. So right now it's, they have to submit a site plan, but not the full development plan application, so it's the thought of, should those go ahead and be concurrently submitted? Based on just the size of that one, I'm gonna guess everything you require in a development plan is probably in there. It just might not be pulled together possibly, but that's the debate on that one. And making sure we can review what those application requirements are. Some of those are in the application, not in the ordinance. Decommissioning was the, number 11 here. So the comments under that were, changes in the project owner. So if, project owner A sells to project owner B, we want to make sure that this decommissioning plan applies. Right now, they'd have to get their decommissioning plan approved again. So it goes back to the commissioners and it goes through that kind of process of approval. But also bankruptcy was added in there, which in my mind, that's our purpose of our bonding. In case they can't do something, we can do it as a community. So that B under there is bonding, county liabilities, and the continuity of those sureties. So, currently your bonding, I was on it, but I scrolled. Your current bonding follows, a lot of that state guidance, which is a tiered bonding kind of basically. When you get to, the 5th anniversary, you're at 25%, then you go up to 50% at 15 years, and you go 100% at 20 years. So the idea is you're kind of scaling that in. That's up for debate, I think, is do you want to do a scaled version or do you want to do non-scaled version? The county liabilities is just that, like if the company did go bankrupt and wasn't here, how do we ensure that we're able to call that bond in? And then the continuity of sureties comes from, your solar projects are 30, 40-year leases, right? You don't go out and buy a bond for 30 or 40 years necessarily. You don't pay that in full. So you're gonna pay that bond payment possibly annually. And so again, if the bond payment is missed, you should get notice, but again, it gets mailed to the county's address. Do you make sure you see those notices? There's always concern there. So I think that was the concern. How do we ensure that continuity of that, the bonds paid and it's still up to date and, that. And then the third, that C, is really just making sure it's more of an acknowledgement that the property owners realize that they are the landlord, more or less, right? They have agreements and that could be a civil matter between them and who's leasing their land. But just making sure that ultimately, they know that they're the landlord, right? So in theory, they're responsible for what happens within their property. It's kind of like if you were to send a violation notice for land use that's illegal, you send it to the property owner, right? Ultimately, landlord is responsible for that, not necessarily the tenant. He needs to go enforce his tenant then, so that's all that is. And then the setbacks, that's probably gonna be the biggest debate, I'm gonna say. And how you wanna kind of currently, so that's one I probably need a little more feedback on for sure. Again, some have looked at residential versus non-residential, some have looked at number of sides, that's been a recent one that was suggested, number of sides that's bordered by the, the solar arrays. Screening does impact that, so, again, traditionally, if it's less distance, it's more screening versus more distance. Maybe you don't require as much screening or any screening. So I don't know if there's we've got a little bit of time, we're still ahead here, of thought backs or guidance on that.
Well, in setbacks or possibly another area, common subject to come up that we haven't touched on these is, there's a great deal of concern. There's community members that feel that, well, if we have 2,000 acres and that's all we're going to have, we can possibly live with that, or may not. There's others that feel opposite of that.
Right.
But there is a huge concern as to, are we wanting to put a cap? Or do we want to put any distance of separation on what would be allowed into the county? Some counties have approached it, only gonna allow a certain percentage of their farm acreages to be used for this. Others have put it in on the setback sides to where they came in and said,
Separation. between-
solar farms that fall in this size range, we're not gonna allow another one within 3 miles or 4
Correct.
miles of that one. And so there's a lot of different approaches to that, and we have to have some consideration as to, what we would want to look at that.
Your current setbacks, just to throw those out there, and I know you guys have copies of it, it's sometimes easier to hear it too. Let's see, sorry. If it is from a right of way, it's gotta be 50 feet. Setbacks from other roads are gonna be 40 feet, so that was a state and county or state aid highways that are 50 feet, all others are 40. Setbacks from a dwelling is 150. You could waive that, and then setbacks can be reduced by 50%, but can have to at least be 30 if there is a continuous evergreen screen, basically.
And we need to have some discussions on the setback side as to where it's measured from. Currently, we state it
Yeah.
being measured from the edge of the panel. There seems to be a lot of push towards it needs to be measured from the fence versus from the panel.
Yeah, so currently it
Because
is
you could-
measured
you could end
from,
up with it extremely close
that.
to your property under our current measuring from the panel. So,
yeah, and that's up to debate. So if you wanna look at, is it fence or is it panel? That's up to you. Again, these are all local preferences that I can.
And I wanted to go back into
Right, okay.
decommissioning. I don't think we've talked about, whether we require the panels to be recycled at all, have we?
We don't require them to be recycled per se. They do have to dispose of them according to state and federal regulations. So
Right.
there's,
Now, isn't there some counties that do require it to be recycled?
okay, and that's something you guys want to look at.
or some that are the portions that are recyclable, you may
Right,
find.
not
a
everything's
great deal of it. I don't think
Let's
that
see.
language is going to be nearly as important as having language that there have to be disposed of in an approved, accepted manner.
Well, and then in order to do that, you're gonna have to have a manifest or something because we don't really know where they're taken unless somebody brings us a manifest that says this is where we took it.
I'm not sure, yeah, like the glass maybe could be recycled, right? But taking that out, I don't know how feasible that really is.
I think
Like,
some of the counties were concerned about just filling up their landfills.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was a concern that they're gonna do it the cheapest way, but not maybe the best way. And then you were worried about landfill filling which is becoming a problem.
But aren't they 90% recyclable? Most of them.
I don't know that answer. I think it probably depends on the panel you're using, I would guess, who you sourced it
I
from, but
think the recycling's a little limited at this point, what I can see. That's something. And then we'll have discussions as well as to how much of the salvage value percentage wise to count in to offset what the amount of the bond would have to be on the
Yeah, that was one.
decommissioning as well.
Mhm.
That would come into play.
yeah, and that decommissioning kind of as we talk through that. So I can look at some language in case you want to consider it on the recycling or disposal, but they, right now, I mean, they can't just go take the whole thing and
Something in landfill.
or put it in the sinkhole or whatever it may be, that's illegal. They still have to dispose of it in an approved manner. So it's going to a dump facility of some sort. If it's hazardous, those hazardous pieces have to go. Again, there's state and federal laws on that, that you can't just dump that.
So there are hazardous pieces to the panels?
I don't know, it depends. I've heard it depends on what panel they use. I don't have good facts on that, so I don't wanna be the one to quote that, but he does.
The panels themselves can be thrown away in a landfill.
Okay,
They're safe enough to be thrown away.
But what about the components?
that's what I've heard. The old ones, maybe not, that you might have used 20 years ago, but
All components to the panel and everything that connects to that panel and makes it be a panel?
That's right. Yep. Be thrown away in a landfill. There is a recycling center outside of Dayton, Ohio, the closest one, and I know that there will be more, but as of right now, that's the closest one that I.
no, just,
Yeah, EPA has a website and shows recycle centers and that type of thing and manufacturers.
You have anything else, Amy?
no, some of you guys, the setbacks, that's just the biggest one to get a little bit of guidance from this committee on. Because that's definitely a local dialogue. Do you want to go more restrictive than what you've got now, or are you looking at going, I'll say less restrictive, just to put both options on the
I
table?
think we're gonna need to look at all of that on the setback side. Now, it is interesting, if I recall correctly, I believe the application is currently before the BZA. They're exceeding our setbacks that we're requiring by quite a bit, if I understand correctly. We'd have to look at that, but that's a separate issue, but we may wanna look at that and see, how that would compare in as to effect. Because they've taken into consideration setbacks and have been willing on that project to have greater setbacks than what we specified on,
Okay,
some of it is for non-participating property owners and so forth, so we may wanna look at that side of it more.
okay, maybe something.
Yeah.
Has there been any dialogue or discussion on numbers though, associated
No,
with
not
it?
that I'm aware of,
Okay,
no. You.
if there was, I wanna
we
take
can-
guidance.
We can give you as to what's in the current application,
Okay,
let's give some idea on that.
yeah, okay, that sounds good. Okay,
But we're ahead of schedule a little bit for what I allowed for this evening, but, I don't wanna get too carried away, but everyone will have an opportunity between now and the next time we get together. Any of these things that you have thoughts on, feel free to drop them in an email. If you get them to the planning commission, we'll look. Sherry, your question on the effect of becoming a public utility, we can look at that.
I don't
That's
think so.
no one here this evening. I don't even think if our attorney was here this evening, that he would have a good answer or understanding. It is something we probably need to look to. It may be that if it became a public utility, we would find a great deal of it outside of our control as such.
So would you like additional information that the public has, how do you want us to communicate it to this board?
If you get it to Taylor at our planning commission ordinance and make a note that you would like it to be distributed to the board, if it's in electronic email format, we'll get it out to the other board members.
I had one more question.
All right?
You guys rushed through to do the UDO when you did it, and you did it based on the information that was available then. We need a lot of changes down here. And that's gonna take time. But what about a moratorium while you guys work on this, so we don't have more of these solar companies come in under our existing and very flawed UDO?
Right. Well, at this particular time, and I did so without, this plan commission taking formal action as such on it. But as commission president, I had reached the conclusion that we needed additional time to be able to look at these. And so on Saturday or Monday morning, whenever it happened again, I sent a email to all three of the commissioners, copied the county attorney, asking for them, if they legally can do so, to consider a moratorium on considering solar applications. My email asked them to actually consider a moratorium on the one that is currently before us. But I don't know from a legal standpoint if they can do so or not. And at this point, I don't believe they've had enough time to consider that, or I have not had any feedback on it.
Well, can we request an emergency meeting through our commissioners to go ahead and address it?
Well, we can talk about it. We need to, I think, to Pat, the attorney, was what the best answer.
Well, I see other counties have done this. I'd be happy to send you their ordinances that they've adopted
Correct.
and they've addressed existing, but there are a lot of unanswered questions here that are affecting the citizenry here, the
Right.
people, and we're not all comfortable with this.
I agree, there's not the main question as such is, can we put a moratorium and delay the application that has already been submitted and accepted by the BZA for their review? And I have not gotten an answer on that.
I
don't know
understand
where
that.
is.
So second one would be for everything else, and then address.
I submitted it both directions as such, and
So what do the people need to do to ask our commissioners to act on this?
So we need to ask the attorney, is that okay? I'm okay with putting a moratorium on it. So when I hear
But
from
the
him,
time is of the essence, so can you please ask him to help you decide how to do this and do an emergency meeting for the people
well, emergency meeting to do what?
to address a moratorium, to stop any more applications to come in, then you can address what you can do with the existing one at any time.
So,
And if your attorney can't do that, maybe the citizens can go ahead and get counsel to go ahead and help you do that.
I don't think there's a need for an emergency meeting. I think there's enough side from on the other side that if this is coming down the pike with the commissioners and they're gonna put a moratorium on accepting any more applications, the planning commission's executive director, who is Mr. Pittman, is in a position not to accept those.
How could he not
Or-
accept that if you're dealing off of?
It takes, he has to have time to, once it even comes into it, it has to be reviewed, it has to be determined if it's all there, so on and so forth. And, to the best of my knowledge, there's just none of these others that are far enough along in the county that are coming.
But that's just your opinion, and so this would give us some protection here.
I am all for protection if we can get it. I just question, or I don't know how
And so has
necessary.
Mr. Pittman delayed the existing applications that?
I don't believe so with what's been done at this particular point. I'm not the
So you don't know
attorney
if
on
it's
it.
been accepted and if it is a done deal at this point?
I know that we have advertised it for a public hearing, is what I know at this particular point.
Yes, Mr. Pittman sitting right here.
Yes,
Yeah.
Mr. Pittman, so you just advertised it?
The solar BZA hearing is gonna
It's
be.
been set
October
for
1st.
a date set for
But
it.
you would have had a completed application in order for you to advertise that to the public for a hearing.
Yeah, I've had not a completed application. I'm still waiting for the development plan.
So how can you advertise that if it's not complete?
Because the development plan doesn't have enough detail for me. The development plan, according to our attorney, was sufficient enough. We got a conceptual plan.
Okay.
And it was sufficient enough for him to say, okay,
So it looks like we got the cart before the horse here.
no, we don't. The BZA is just one permit.
Currently, your ordinance doesn't require a development plan to be submitted concurrently with your special exception application.
Yeah.
That would follow. All your development plans, it's making sure they're gonna comply with all those
Right.
requirements. Does require a site
The
plan.
requirements of the existing UDO that is missing all the points that we just started to touch on tonight. So does that make you an objective viewer of that or subjective? Where does that come in
I'm
at?
not calling a question.
Who's making these decisions if you're looking at that and saying this meets it or it doesn't
I've
meet it?
consulted with our county attorney.
So again, we're back to the same county attorney.
Absolutely right.
And it looks like we're in a holding pattern here, so maybe you might wanna get a second
Well,
opinion.
I'd suggest, the commissioners on the moratorium questions who you need to be speaking to. There's one of them here this evening, another in the audience, but there's nothing that this board or this meeting can address directly further than that, or what we have.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The only other thing I would cover is I could ask the board here as a whole is, what are your thoughts on wanting to slow these process down until we have an opportunity to visit these ordinances? I made it clear I didn't have the board's vote on that as such, and I'm not asking for a vote tonight because we're not meeting as a plan commission board, but what are your thoughts as we look around the room? Is everyone in favor of that approach?
Just I've tried to review the application and it's just a ton of information. It's more than what I don't have the education for it or the expertise for it. It's a lot of information. And, I helped work on the UDO the year we did that. And so just between the knowledge I have, I just feel like to be fair to the solar application and be fair to the citizens of the county, I don't see how we as a county are prepared or equipped to handle such an extensive application. I think when we wrote this ordinance, we did the best we could at the time, considering what the state was allowing us to do.
I just don't have the staffing levels of some
Correct.
communities.
Yeah,
That
and so then-
becomes an issue.
We get our first application and it's
It's hard.
very large and it's very hard to understand and to, just to try and grasp it all. So anyway, I just feel like to be fair on both sides, be fair to the applicant and be fair to the citizens. I don't see how we can make a decision on that right now. I think we need to have a moratorium on that application and on the ordinances so that we can be better prepared for that.
Yes.
I'm sorry, but the application was submitted in early July, and it's been publicly available for people to review. Our opinion is that we have a vested right in place. We applied under the current rules of the ordinance and, you know, we have a hearing set and our application has been accepted and we are submitting public notice. We've undertaken a large door knocking campaign. We've spoken with the county council. There's an information meeting upcoming. So, you know, our belief, our position is that we have a vested right there.
I understand that. You know, I don't know the localities of that all the way through, but I understand that. You know, I can understand if anyone that was building, just as simple as building a house and you came down and there's something different about your house and all at once our zoning department's telling you you're gonna have to wait to build your house, that we already accepted your building application until we can change such and such, but it does,
Our transition rules again say, when you
yes.
submit that application, those are the rules
definite-
you're
definite
following.
areas.
And that's basically.
What we're doing in this county, the experience, I disagree that we rushed our UDO through. We spent a great deal of time on it. We were not as knowledgeable on the solar at that time. It's much more complicated issue than I had any idea. We relied on the models of the state and at the time understood that Purdue and part of IU both have been involved in putting that model together. And my first thought was, well, it must be very agricultural friendly if Purdue backed it. Since then, I became a little more knowledgeable. Purdue isn't necessarily always just looking out for the agricultural
But they're
side.
backed by the solar company, yes.
They can be
That's what
lots
we're
of different
doing.
things that come into play there. So slow down and look
I didn't
and
mean to
then.
say you rushed.
Yeah, and then the counties that were not unique either, the counties that I've contacted that have experienced this. I think I've talked to at least 5 here in Indiana. Without exception, every single one of those counties have either changed their solar ordinances or they're in the process of reviewing them and changing them to deal with different areas that they have concerns. The areas that I cannot get a solid answer from them as such is, are you making these changes because of negative things that happened because of the solar? Are you making these changes because of a political or public outcry against the solar? And the most common seems to be that the changes are being made because of public outcry of the solar. When I try to nail down specifics, has it caused glare? Has it caused noise problems? Or do you have different runoff than you had before? The answers on that don't seem to be there, that those have been particular problems.
Because those people haven't had a voice, but I'll be happy to share that voice with you. If you'd like to look at this, I'll be happy to.
And I've looked at that as well, and do know all of them have indicated to me that it's been a very divisive issue for their county.
Is anybody on this board, are they affected directly by 1,000+ acres around them, surrounding them in solar panels?
I don't know. I know in this particular, not necessarily board members, one thing that I have noticed in this particular application, you know, some of the landowners do have their homes impacted directly. Some of the other applications before Madison, the landowners' homes were located elsewhere, but in this situation, quite a few of the homeowners that have submitted are affected. There are, members of this board that, have land that would be involved in this as such.
And they should have recused themselves.
I don't think they should recuse themselves from the discussions. They may need to make a decision to recuse themselves from a vote on a particular issue.
Well, they should decide, the board should
Yes,
she
yeah,
should make
Yeah,
that.
that's something I haven't looked at detail, but it was important as well. You know, we invited and we have, a member from the solar community that is sitting on this as well. I want to be certain that we get information from all parties.
They don't have a vested interest in that.
Oh, yes, they have a vested interest as well. Yes.
And
they
you
do.
can't see the negative and only see political
Well,
from the people that are questioning this.
we're gonna call this meeting closed here shortly, but I think that it's very clear that this board has a vested interest in doing what's best for Jefferson County as a whole and to limit the impact on surrounding property owners, so forth.
And thank you for that, and thank you for referring it for a moratorium. So for this board, I thank you.
And I don't think that, the board is just listening to one side, but there's not any way that the board could obtain the information they need without some of it coming from people that have vested interest. The people with the vested interest are going to be the most knowledgeable in some areas. That information can also come from people that have a vested interest in stopping solar. You know, they have just as much access to this board for, to provide information as such.
And to information.
Yes.
sir.
Yes, and there's the communities that have dealt with it, they have put together a great deal of information that's available online in different positions and so forth. You know, the disadvantage that I find that citizens are in this is they don't have the dollars at their disposal to be able to hire the consultants to come in and do the real estate appraisal study. Does it affect real estate values? Does it not? Yeah, and so there is problems that is in that area as such, whereas the company that is wanting to put it in does have access to being able to find consultants to do that type of thing. So we're doing our best to try to
I know
balance
you are.
that.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Anything else?
No, so our next steps here, I'm gonna take your input from tonight and continue the strike through and underlined version of what we have here for those 8. We did discuss, and again, those were kind of easier ones. In theory, they were gonna basically be, in some way, again, we would have implemented a lot of those anyway through maintenance or through your other permitting or the state and federal statutes already, so. The next ones then, I will go ahead and draft number 9 through now 15, for you guys, and I'll, get the goals, similar to the UD, I was always to send those out to you guys about a week prior, so that you have a chance to at least glance through them. And we'll try to make our way through those next week. Again, I'm guessing some will be a little bit more in-depth than others. What, that's our next meeting? Oh, yeah, that was my next question too. I know that we originally tried to set it and it ended up being the same day the BZA meeting, and that was, that obviously does not work. I don't know if you've identified one. I know initially you talked about maybe the 15th, but I don't know if that's.
Well, that normally we meet on a Tuesday evening. But
Right.
that Tuesday evening is when the BZA hearing is scheduled for the, current solar.
Right,
So we were looking at pushing our meeting to the next Tuesday evening after that.
and that was the 8th. That was the one where I've already got another
And
public
you got a public
hearing
commitment that
scheduled,
day.
so I can't
So
do the 8th, but I
what
could do the 15th if you wanted.
are you all right pushing out to the 15th?
If you wanna keep it on a Tuesday, or we can do another night of the week, but
15th.
that's up to you guys.
Is this, and we'd meet here again on the 5th? All right, that's fine.
We can get this and see if we can make a bigger room.
Okay,
Okay, so this building now,
October 1st.
October 1st.
okay, but this committee meeting is October 15th.
This one will be
5:30 to 7:30, right? Just to make that, not to confuse those two. 5:30 to 7:30, and Taylor, you said it'll be in this building,
Yes.
Yeah.
room TBD, but this building.
Matt's over there. He didn't kick us out
Okay.
this time.
Yeah.
Sounds like a,
I appreciate everybody coming this evening. I'd appreciate even more, the more that you can put in a short email or, put on paper and, get to us to where, we have some thoughts. on particular concerns and so forth, we'll take them in matter. You know, I try to take approach to where we can look at possible solutions. I don't want to get as divided as we have as to where you're either on this side or that side. I would rather see the sides come together towards something that may or may not work in the community as a whole. Again, thank you again. We'll adjourn.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks. You know, it's